Okay, so hello and welcome back to the channel. This week we're going to be talking about something that comes up a lot in filmmaking and video and is, again, a tool which I actually use a lot, and it's really something worth considering when you're either making a video or a film. So let's get straight into it. Today we're going to talk about aspect ratio. We're going to talk about what it is, we're going to talk about why it's useful, we're going to talk about how you can kind of, use it and use different aspect ratios to your advantage in your video or film. And we're going to close the window because that is very, very loud. And we're just going to dive into some historical examples and ways in which I use aspect ratio as a filmmaker to my advantage. Let's get straight to it. Okay, so what is an aspect ratio? This is something that if you've studied film or that you are a filmmaker, you will probably know and understand quite well. But if you're new to video or film, or it's just something you haven't done a ton of, this might not be something you necessarily understand. So in simple terms, the aspect ratio is the ratio, surprisingly, of the width and the height of your video. So for example, if you pull out your phone, whether it's an iPhone or whatever it may be, and you turn it on its side, the shape that you have in most circumstances is probably going to be 16 across, 9 up. Now that is a ratio, not a measurement, so I'm not talking about millimeters or centimeters, but that is the ratio to which the size, width and height of your video and or your screen may be. Now starting with 16 by 9, 16 by 9 is the most common aspect ratio we see these days. It is the aspect ratio of which 99% of TVs in the world currently are. It is the aspect ratio that both of my monitors are, and as I said, it's the aspect ratio that most phone screens are, at least in their standard viewing box type of thing. But 16 by 9 is not the only aspect ratio out there, and there are varying kinds of shapes and sizes of video and film throughout history and still now around today. So let's jump back really far ago and look at some aspect ratios that have been around for a long time. Now, if you have seen some old TV, to be honest, it doesn't even have to go back that far. You can look at The Simpsons or even some early episodes of Friends. They are shot in a 4:3 aspect ratio. That means it is a square almost, rather than the rectangular shape we're used to. So if you watch early episodes of The Simpsons on your TV now, what you'll most likely see is black bars at the side of your video. This is because the shape of the video you are watching, The Simpsons, doesn't currently fit to the shape of your TV. That is because they are a different aspect ratio. Now, as I said, the most common thing you'll get is black bars at the side. Historically, some people have tried to kind of use different techniques, whether it's, filling out the sides with different things, extending the video, or, kind of reshaping the video to try and make it work with different aspect ratio monitors. But to be honest, most of them don't really work, and the standard preference is just to view it with black bars at the side of the screen. So then if you flip that around and look at a different type of aspect ratio, let's look at something like a 2:3:5:1 ratio, which is most commonly seen in Hollywood movies. You've got the same scenario, but you've got it on the other side. So you've got your black bars now at the top and the bottom of the screen. This is because you've got a wider film, or at least the same width film, but the video is not as tall. Now, what's actually more common is that the video is wider than that even, but of course, when it's shrunk down to fit on these screens, it becomes a longer, thinner video rather than the same height. Okay, so if we define that old film and telly used to use a more square 4:3 ratio, and Hollywood movies and movies for the most part tend to use a 2:3:5:1 wide ratio, well, why is this done? So historically, the aspect ratio of the film was actually a physical thing. It was actually the shape of the film stock. So this wasn't something you could change later. This wasn't something you could kind of decide, you wanted to mess around with in post-production. This was the shape of the film, and this is what it was always going to look like. So of course you could use different film stocks. You could use a film stock with a different aspect ratio to give a different effect. But of course you were limited to the TVs and the viewing platforms at which they were being viewed on. Now, because we've seen movies for so long now use that kind of widescreen 2:3:5:1 aspect ratio, or a similar ratio, I know they're not all the same, we now really associate that kind of ratio, that widescreen look, with being cinematic. And yes, cinematic is a term that is wildly overused in the YouTube and film learning space, but I'm going to use it here because I think actually this is one of the few times where it is relevant. There is definitely such a thing as a cinematic look, and this does entail a lot of different things. It is not just the shape, it's not just the aspect ratio, but it can be a major factor, and it is something you can change, and especially nowadays with modern tech and DSLRs, you can do in post-production sometimes. So what I'm going to quickly do to kind of make this more clear is I'm going to show you an example of the video as it is now, 16 by 9, which is what we are currently filming in on YouTube, and I'm going to make it 2:3:5:1. So you can see as these bars have come in, that's kind of cut off some of the top and the bottom, and it might actually affect the framing. Now this is definitely something you need to bear in mind if you're going to be shooting in different aspect ratios, is that your framing may have to change if you change your aspect ratio. Now, for example, on my monitor, which I'm using, which is an Atomos Ninja 5, I can set a different aspect ratio on the screen, so it's going to do the cutting for me, and I'm going to be able to view exactly what I'll see, on the final product. But if you haven't got that, you need to be extra careful. If I film as I am now in 16:9 and then decide in post-production that I want to add the bars or change the shape and make it, a more cinematic style, that is going to change my framing and that's going to change my headroom. So for example, as you can see again, that's probably cutting off the top of my head. Now there is things I can do. Obviously I can move the video up as we've now got a bit of leeway at the top and bottom. You can see that that's fixed the issue to some degree. But of course it has also cut out detail in the bottom and the top of the frame, and this is something that you need to be very careful of. If, for example, I had a Coke can there and I wanted that to be in the shot, say we're shooting a film and that's a prop, I might want that to be in the shot. If I change the aspect ratio in post-production and put it there, that might then take it out of the shot and that might be an issue. So always bear in mind if you're shooting in different aspect ratios, and especially if you're going to change it later, this is something you need to be careful of. Okay, so what I've just said is you can now change your aspect ratio in post-production, assuming you're using a digital camera. Now there are two ways of doing this, one of which is very, very simple, one of which is slightly more complicated. So the really simple way of doing it is literally just to add black bars. So I'll show you now on my computer. I have a PNG file of a 2351 CinemaScope bar, and I'm literally just going to drag that on top of the footage and scale it correctly, and it will give the desired effect. So all this is doing is quite literally adding the bars on top of your footage. The upside to this is that it's very, very easy to do and you can achieve a look very quickly. The downside, of course, is that you then cannot get rid of them. Once you've exported that file and it's embedded in, that change of aspect ratio is locked in your video and it's not something you can ever take off or ever get back what's underneath it because it's hidden, it's blocked by the bars. So this is a lesson I've learned the hard way over the years. I have occasionally exported a video, maybe it's a bit of work for a client or maybe it was a short film of my own, and I've exported it with these black bars on top because that's the look I wanted. But then if I'm trying to integrate that video later on, say into a show reel, if it's got the black bars in it and I can't get rid of them because you can't, then my aspect ratio is going to change, and that's an issue I've had in show reels in the past. Some people may be okay with that and they might be fine with an aspect ratio changing, but personally for a show reel, if you're showing off a bunch of work back to back to back, I don't really like the fact that the aspect ratio is going to change based on the shape of the video. So that's something to bear in mind if you're going to be repurposing the videos. It might be always worth exporting one without the bars attached. So the other way you can do it nowadays inside most editing softwares is to just export your video in a different shape. So I'm not going to run you through how to do this because it's a little bit more time consuming, but there's loads of YouTube videos on how to do it on the internet. Basically, you're just going to change your export settings to actually crop your video and create that shape of the video rather than adding the bars. So it has the same effect, it just means there's no bars embedded in your video. Now this can be beneficial again because it means if it's on a platform like YouTube, YouTube now will actually change the shape for you. It will automatically show it in that shape. But of course, if you are to go full screen on my monitor, for example, with a video that is a different shape, it's still going to add the bars because it needs to fill the space. So you can't really get around black bars. If there's something you don't want, just film 16:9. Okay, so something I used to do a lot at university, and to be honest, I've still done a lot going forward, is to add the black bars after the fact to create a more cinematic look. And the question we always got given was, is that a good thing to do? Is it something that should be kind of suggested, or is it really a bad idea? And to be honest, I kind of fall into two camps on this one. Now, as I always say on this channel, if you can shoot something the way it's intended to be viewed, you should. If you plan properly and you know what your post-production is going to be, you know the desired look for the video and you know exactly kind of, what it's going to be used for, you shouldn't need to change the aspect ratio once you've filmed. Now, this might mean, of course, filming with black bars on, whether that's in camera or whether that's a literal aspect ratio thing. But if you can do it beforehand and you can make that choice before you ever shoot, you absolutely should. However, I'm not going to lie and say there hasn't been plenty of times when I've added that in post because I've not had the correct feel for the video. Like with anything in video and film, you've got to bear in mind what it's being used for and what the purpose of the change is. Now, say for example, I shoot some B-roll for a client. Let's think about, a time when I've worked with a motorbike company and we've done a product video where we're showing off their land and their bikes. Now this might be something that you do in slow-mo, you might want that kind of cool cinematic film-like look to it, and this is where adding bars can be really, really helpful as it helps create a perception that this is cinematic. And this is something that's backed up more and more on YouTube now as you see creators like Peter McKinnon and all sorts of film and photography YouTubers using black bars to create a tone for parts of their video. Not the whole video, but sections which are meant to be, more epic or they're slow-mo or they're cinematic, again, dare I say it. Peter McKinnon's a great example as he also often uses a different aspect ratio for his main video. So you're gonna get like a 1:8:5 style small black bar up top and bottom, which again is only a subtle change, but it does give it more of a, dare I say, high-end feel, and it can change the look of your video and pulls it away from the very standard 16:9 YouTube look. So if you really have a good reason for changing your aspect ratio in post-production, you might even want to make it 4:3 to kind of make it feel old school, and you're going to add a black and white effect on it. I think that's perfectly fine. But again, if you can plan it going in, then you absolutely should. So I think I've covered most aspects of the aspect ratio, excuse the pun, now in this video, so I think I'm going to wrap it up there. If you've got any comments or suggestions about things that you'd like me to talk about, whether it's, filmmaking background things, whether it's techniques, please drop them in the comments below. I really would like to know what you guys want to hear. And of course, as ever, please leave a like, share my video around. I'm still trying to grow this channel. I'm still trying to get more people to come in and listen to what I've got to say. So if you can share it around, show your friends, all that kind of stuff, that would be really, really appreciated. So that'll do for this one. Please join me next week or whenever I end up filming again, where I'll go through another filming technique and dive into detail about some of these things, which, I feel like I can pass back on to you guys. I hope to see you then. See you next week.